Chapter 19, Disappointment. This question hovered in Zhang Xuaning's mind all night, and there was no answer. She didn't know exactly how this election worked. In this way, even those who have some doubts in their hearts cannot be verified. Early the next morning, more news came out about the eldest princess of Liang's choice of companions. For example, the list of companions for the primary selection. Shen Ziyi has played since she was a child, and Xiao Shu, the eldest lady of the Qinqiu mansion, is naturally among them, followed by other ministers and 11 young ladies with good knowledge and cultivation in the noble family. Among them is the good fate Zhang Xuaning. At the same time, she also noticed that the last time she was in Qingyuan Bafo, Shen Ziyi pointed out that Miss Fan, who was the leader in the poem, and Yu Yu, the second lady of Qingyuan Bafo, who was the leader in the painting, were also among them. For example, what you want to learn specifically. The men of the great cotters have to learn etiquette, music, archery, royalty, calligraphy, and mathematics, but the daughters of ordinary families can know at most a few words, and what they learn are dispensable things such as female read, poetry, and painting. But Shen Ziyi is a princess, and she already has requirements, so it is naturally different. In the 6 arts of the gentleman, etiquette, music, and books are to be learned, and secondly, to learn some incense and painting elegance. In addition, the saint favored Shen Ziyi, knowing that she always wanted to sneak to the Wenhua Hall to listen to the scriptures and feasts, so he found a few knowledgeable old gentlemen for her in the Hanlin Academy, and told her some books that only men can read. One of the most astonishing of them, or perhaps one of these gentlemen whom the Holy God invited for her, was actually Mr. Xiet. When the prince and the prince are in danger, it is said that he will give 2 lessons, one is the qin, which is counted in the music, and the other is to choose one of the subsets of scriptures and histories, but the specific one has not yet been decided. God knows that when Zhang Xuaning heard the news from Lianer's little mouth, she couldn't wait to grab the ground with her head. Another example is the arrangement of entering the palace. The day after tomorrow, I will prepare to enter the palace, stay for about 3 to 5 days, follow the female officials in the palace, learn the etiquette of the court, and understand the taboos in the court, so as not to make any mistakes and cause trouble. At this time, if you really can't learn or your qualifications are too poor, you will be politely persuaded to quit. Then they went home for a few days, and then they really entered the palace to study. Basically live in the palace, and can go home for 1 day every 9 days, until the completion of the studies arranged by the gentleman. It is estimated that there will be more than half a year. It's definitely a good opportunity. As long as Zhang Xuaning thinks of entering the palace to accompany her, her head is as big as a fight, and of course she doesn't dare to blatantly say that she can't go down to the will of the saint, so there must be a suitable reason. If you can't learn etiquette, or your qualifications are too poor and you are persuaded to quit, is it just right? She made up her mind to slack off. Afternoon. Tanger and Lianer packed up the things she needed to prepare for the first trip to the palace in the house, and said that when she entered the palace, she would see so many young ladies of the family, and she had to bring some greeting gifts and the like, so it was best to go out and buy some later. Zhang Xuaning sat by the window reading idle books, and the corners of her mouth twitched slightly when she listened. Those who know say that they are going to read together, and those who don't know think they are going to go to relatives. Lianer pouted. When the girl enters the palace, of course, she has to be well prepared, and this time the slaves and maids can't follow up. Who knows what those palace maids in the palace are like? And our girl is the only one who didn't have her name but was on the companion list. She can lose anything, and she can't lose in pomp. Zhang Xuaning's eyelids jumped when she heard this. Sure enough, it's better to find a tooth woman to sell this girl first, right? Why don't you open any pot and mention it? She buried her head and picked up a piece of candied fruit from the plate to eat, and flipped through the book to read, no matter how much they tossed. She didn't plan to stay in the palace for too long anyway. It's just that it can't be said either. If people know that she deliberately plays tricks and doesn't want to enter the palace, she is afraid of causing some unnecessary trouble. The fewer people who know, the better, and it's better not to have any. It's just that I haven't turned another 2 pages, and suddenly I heard a pop sound, as if something small had hit the window sash. Zhang Suining raised her head and looked, and there was only a shadow of the sun outside. Just as he was about to lower his head and continue reading, there was a soft pop sound. This time it hit the lattice, bounced, and rolled down onto her book. When she picked it up, it was a golden pine nut with a small slit. With a hard squeeze of the fingers, it opened. It turned out to be fried pine nuts. Cooked. Zhang Suining didn't see anyone, but she already knew who was coming, so she couldn't help laughing. The courtyard wall in the house is built as if it hasn't been built. If my father knows that you came in without a sound and without going through the main gate, I'm afraid I'll have to complain again. But didn't he see it this time? Yan Lin's voice came from a high place, only appeared from the dense shade of the tree under the wall, jumped down with a jump, and today wore a robe of Tibetan robes, with a small purse hanging from his waist, and a small handful of pine nuts in his hand, and walked to her window with a smile. Unless you go and file a complaint. I haven't seen him for a few days. He seems to have tanned a little bit, and there is a shallow abrasion on his originally handsome face, but fortunately it is not deep or much, and it is not really broken, but it adds a bit of toughness to the original nobleman's temperament, and it looks even more scorching. Zhang Suining asked him, how did you get it? Yan Lin still cared a little about this appearance, and when he heard this, he raised his hand and touched his cheek, coughed, and said, when I went to the Tongzhou camp, I drank a little wine, and I couldn't help but compete with my father's subordinates. But it's not a big deal. The doctor in the army said that it would be okay to leave it for 2 days. Fengtai camp and Tongzhou camp have garrisons in all dynasties, in order to defend the Beijing division. However, since 20 years ago, the king of Pingnan rebelled and invaded the capital, and Fengtai and Tongzhou had no time to react and could not enter Beijing in time to quell the rebellion. The first emperor set up a forbidden army in Beijing, and selected the best of the 2 battalions to come out and join it to guard the capital. In the Deban dynasty, after Shen Lang ascended the throne, he further strengthened the forbidden army. Just because he was a witness to the rebellion of the king of Pingnan that year, he had a deep shadow of the danger of the rebellion of the vassal king and the slowness of the army, so the status of the Fengtai battalion and the Tongzhou battalion in the army declined more and more. The Yanji Marquis mansion was one of the several nobles in charge of military power in the court, mainly in charge of the Tongzhou battalion, which was far away from the capital. As for the Fengtai camp, which is closer to the capital, it is under the control of the Qinqiu mansion. Today, the most important 26 guards and forbidden army are under the control of the emperor himself and the Ministry of War. It can be seen from this that although the Yan family and the Xiao family are the 2 most comparable noble families in the capital, the Xiao family of the Qinqiu mansion is the foreign family of the current Saint Shen Lang, and it is obviously more trusted than the Yan family. I don't know who is pushing behind the affairs of the Yanji Marquis mansion. Zhang Suining looked at Yan Lin and said, how is Zhou Yinzi? Yan Lin glanced at the busy maid in her room, only put the handful of pine nuts in her hand on the table by the window, and turned over and sat down as soon as she supported the window edge. One leg hung outside, but the other leg was bent on the window edge, and she took a piece of candied fruit to eat. Then he said, this person is a little interesting. He thought about it for a while, and actually showed a rather appreciative look, I saw him before I left Beijing, is neither humble nor arrogant. Calm down, probably because he is a brocade guard, he knows a lot about things in the DPRK and China, and he should be able to do things. It's just that I think this person is useful, and it's not just because of that. There's something related to him lately, I wonder if you've heard of it. Zhang Xuning was curious. There have been assassins in the capital recently, and it is not peaceful. I haven't gone out, and I haven't paid attention to the outside. What's the matter? Yan Lin said, this person has a good horse, he likes it very much, he has to feed it himself every day, there is no open territory in the capital, if he has time, he will take it to the suburbs of Beijing to run horses. But not long ago, when he was dealing with official business in the guardhouse, a child suddenly came to the house, and it was rumored that his horse was sick and was about to die. The man immediately took leave of absence from the commander, and when he went home to see the horse, he drew his saber and killed it with his own hands. Zhang Xuning was suddenly stunned. Yan Lin laughed. On the second day, he went to Zhenfu Division, and the chief asked him, "Is your horse okay?" He said, "The horse is dead, I killed it." The commander was amazed and asked him why. He actually said that he had raised this horse for more than 2 years, and he was like his own relatives, but the horse was sick, and he couldn't bear to see it in pain, so he simply gave it a good time, saved him from some torture, and repaid the friendship between the horse and him for more than 2 years. The horse. Where can Zhang Xuning not know? When she went to find Zhou Yin that day, the horse was fine. Why was it so sick that she was dying, and she was still miserable? The only thing she could think of at this moment was the excuse she casually made up when she asked the little boy to go to the guard to find him back. Lord Zhou's beloved horse was sick and dying. A chill suddenly spread from the solace of his feet to his whole body. Zhang Xunning's fingers holding down the pages of the book did not hold it down, and trembled slightly. Yan Lin said, "It's hard to say whether this statement is true or false, but the killing of horses is true. This man's decisiveness and neatness can be seen. Recently, the Holy Lord intends to leave the matter of the prison to Jin Yiwei to deal with, but the criminal department, Dali Temple, and the Metropolitan Procuratorate, which were originally in charge of the affairs of the prison, all have great opinions. This time, the criminal department impeached Zhou Qinhu in the matter, which just gave the 3 law divisions an opportunity to play on the topic, and the saint couldn't bear the crowd, and he had withdrawn Zhou Qinhu's official products a few days ago. I have been dotted in the court, and this deficiency just happened to Zhou Yinzi. Zhou Yinzi doesn't see rabbits and doesn't scatter eagles. Yan Lin is neat, and it's good." Although Zhang Xuning was reborn, she didn't know anything about the government when she went through these things in her previous life, and she only knew the final result, but how things happened, what was the specific situation in the middle, and how many forces were wrestling, it was not clear at all. If you rashly remind you don't know who will fall into the eyes. I'm afraid that I didn't help the Yanji Marquis mansion and hurt myself, but if Zhou Yinzi comes to warn, one can hide himself, and the other is that Zhou Yinzi is the secret son sent by Jin Yiwei to investigate the relationship between the Yanji Marquis mansion and the Pingnan Wang's anti-party relationship, and knows more about this matter itself than her, and can come up with real news, so as to arouse enough attention from the Yanji Marquis mansion. Even if you can't avoid disaster, if you can take some precautions and preparations in advance, you can avoid being like in the previous life. Although some people died, many more died in exile. Some are because of old age and infirmity, some are because of bandits, and some are poor and sick. This includes Yan Lin's father. Zhang Xuning felt a little heavy in her heart, and only said that she was completely used by Zhou Yinzi in her previous life, and although she still used this person in this life, she must also take strict precautions. Today, he can kill his beloved horse for a trickle. Tomorrow I can also raise the butcher knife to her for my career and future. She couldn't help but remind Yan Lin, I think this man likes his horse, but he can kill it, although he is decisive, but he is also ruthless. Yan Lin's eyebrows stretched, knowing that she cared about herself, and only said, I know. Zhang Xuning didn't want to say anything, so she only lowered her eyebrows and picked up the handful of pine nuts that he had just put down to peel them. The pine nut kernel is a small one, which is not pleasant to peel and a little troublesome. She frowned as she peeled it off. Yan Lin smiled, and only then did he untie the bulging purse hanging from his waist and throw it to her. I know that you are impatient to peel it, open it, and take a look. She caught the purse, only to feel heavy. When I opened it, I saw that it was all pine nuts that had been peeled, and they were gathered together. It's not valuable, but it takes a lot of effort to peel it off. Just looking at this bulging purse, one can imagine how the young man sitting on the edge of her window used his hands that used only to hold a sword, little by little, to carefully peel the pine nuts out of the shell. Then save it up. And then throw it at her as if nothing happened. Yan Lin saw that she didn't speak, and thought she didn't like it. Don't you like to eat? Zhang Xuning shook her head. No, I like it very much. Yan Lin wondered, then why don't you eat it? Zhang Xuning didn't know how to explain, although the thing was small, but the mind was too heavy, and she was afraid that she couldn't afford it. There is a cool autumn wind blowing in front of the window, and September is coming to an end, and the aroma of Osman thus is gradually disappearing. Yan Lin didn't see her speak for a long time, and for some reason, she remembered the strange words she said to him that night, and when she raised her eyes, she saw that her maid had packed a few more books and asked her, Girl, do you want to bring a few books to the palace tomorrow? Zhang Xuning didn't look back. Don't bring it. Yan Lin then remembered the matter of entering the palace, took her a candied fruit, and smiled. I want to enter the palace as the princess's companion, and I can also be taught by Mr. Xie. How's that, happy? Zhang Xuning was so happy that it was strange. She opened her mouth to say that she didn't want to go at all. But before the words came out, when he looked up, he saw Yan Lin's smile on his face, and when he thought about it again, he felt that his words seemed to reveal a little smugness, and he suddenly had a bad premonition in his heart. Zhang Xuning's eyelids jumped. You just came back and knew about the companion reading 2 days ago. Yan Lin let out an ah and winked at her. Her dark eyes were shining brightly, and the color between her eyebrows became more and more obvious. I already knew about the princess's choice of companions, and I mentioned you to her a long time ago, and asked her to add you no matter what. You always say that you want to go to a place you haven't seen before. Aren't you very curious about the things in the palace in the past? With this great opportunity, of course I can't forget Ning Ning. Well, I've done this beautifully, haven't I? Zhang Xuning. It's been a long time. You're going to me. She resisted the urge to push this kid off the windowsill. The corners of her mouth twitched, and she seemed to be smiling, but in fact, she secretly clenched her back molars, and only said, beautiful. It's so beautiful, it's so surprising. Yan Lin didn't know why he felt a little chill on the back of his neck. But when Ning Ning was happy, he was happy. So he said, although I don't know what Mr. Xie wants to teach you to read at the moment, learning the piano has been decided, and there will definitely be. A few days ago, I had ordered someone to collect some good qins, and some of them were still hundreds of years old. Mr. Xie loves the qin. If you go to the palace to learn the piano and bring a good one, that is, Mr. is strict, and he will tolerate you a little bit for the sake of the qin's face. Today is just right. There is still some time, let's go, I'll take you Xiangqin. Zhang Xuning was furious when she heard the words Mr. Xie, and her head was even bigger when she heard Qin, and she wanted to say that she would come back with persuasion when she went, and she really didn't need this thing. Can't stand Yan Lin's domineering. After a while, she was forcibly taken into the carriage by him and went out of the house to choose the piano. Asterisk. At this time, 14 days had passed since the Double Ninth festival. Yu Fangyan didn't know how many times she stepped into this trading house, and after asking about the market price of raw silk today, she frowned, and didn't care how many white eyes the guy at the counter looked at her, and still thanked her sincerely and honestly. For more than 10 days in a row, she learned to read the ledger and practice bookkeeping, and her eyes were bloodshot. When I walked out of business, I only felt lightheaded. The street market outside was bustling with people and cars. Recently, the house has become more and more strict, and she always sneaks out. If she is discovered by her two sisters, especially the second sister, I am afraid that it will be tortured again. The second sister has just been selected as the eldest princess's companion, and no one in the house dares to offend her. Yu Fangyan thought that she should go back earlier today. And I only slept for 2 hours last night, so I couldn't stay up. But as I walked, I saw a small stall on the side of the road, on which there were many delicately embroidered brocade handkerchiefs and incense sachets, as well as all kinds of embroidery samples. Among them was an orchid embroidered with green calyx on the sachet, and the stitching method was something she had never seen before, and her eyes stopped for a moment, and her footsteps stopped. Yu Fangyan remembered the white peony that had been soiled by herself. So she reached out and picked up the sachet and looked at it carefully. I didn't want someone to pass by, and I accidentally bumped into her, and she was in a trance and couldn't even stand firmly, so she was taken forward and pounced, and she didn't want to panic around the sleeves of her clothes, and swept most of the neatly hung brocade and sachets on the ground. The peddler was also a small business, and immediately shouted, "What's the matter with you, girl?" Yu Fangyan suddenly felt guilty. "I'm sorry, I just want to see the sachet, I didn't mean to." The eyes of everyone around her fell on her, which made her very embarrassed, and she hurriedly lowered her head, helped the vendor pick up the things that fell on the ground one by one, and apologized repeatedly. There was a lot of movement on the street, and everyone couldn't help but point fingers at her. Zhang Xuning followed Yan Lin upstairs to this elegantly decorated secluded pavilion, and before she could walk in, she heard the voice, turned her head, followed the voice, and saw the embarrassed girl in the crowd. Picking up a sachet knocked over more, getting more, and more scrambling. She recognized that it was Yu Fangyan, and she couldn't help but suffocate slightly. Nothing seems to have changed. How clumsy it was, how clumsy it is now. Look at the stall again, it sells sachets and brocade. She suddenly laughed to herself. What are you expecting? I didn't know long ago that a girl in the back house had never learned housekeeping, but I was afraid that she wouldn't even be able to read the account book. She couldn't write a few words, and she was still bound by her family. Even if you have money in your hand, if you die, you will buy some land. Do you really expect her to take the money to take risks, buy raw silk and do business? Yu Fangyan, who was so bold and outrageous in the previous life, is only one after all. Yan Lin followed her gaze and recognized that it was the Yu family maid she had saved that day, and frowned for a while. What's wrong? Zhang Xuning retracted her gaze, lowered her eyes, and said, I can save the disease, but I can't save my life. Sometimes I know that something is impossible, but when I really see the impossibility with my own eyes, I will still be a little disappointed. Yan Lin looked back at her with some doubts. She smiled slowly, it's okay. Just a little bit.